Did you already send a message to Upi?
Yes, but no response yet.
Mhm.
Okay, I think I just started.
Mhm.
Oke, selamat malam kawan-kawan semua dimanapun berada. Selamat datang di acara satelit event URF 2021. Terima kasih sudah hadir malam ini dalam sesi diskusi bersama Vincent Bevins yang akan dipandu oleh moderator Amira Kaca. Amira Kaca merupakan founder dari Yayasan Rumah Cerita dan komunitas Baca Rasa Dengar, klub buku, dan sekarang juga chair of the board dari Yayasan Rumah Cerita. Sekarang sedang studi PhD Public Policy di Blavatnik School of Government, University Oxford. Acara kali ini didukung oleh Kedutaan Besar Amerika Serikat bekerja sama dengan Universitas Katolik Soegijapranata, Universitas Lambung Mangkurat, dan komunitas Baca Rasa Dengar Jakarta. Sebelum acara kita mulai, saya perkenankan Ibu Janet untuk memberikan sambutan. I offer to you, Ibu.
Selamat malam. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last session of our satellite program. And very excited tonight to be presenting Vincent Bevins, who will be connecting with our Jakarta-based friends. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the satellite program is a very exciting part of the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival and our Yayasan, which helps us connect with a wider literary audience around Indonesia. With Indonesia having more than 17,000 islands, it allows us to venture into some of the more remote areas of Indonesia and connect with these literary groups on various islands. But of course, tonight we're based in Jakarta, but hopefully also we'll be extending across the archipelago. So a big thank you to the American Embassy and also to Leo and Upi, who have been such fantastic supporters of us for many, many years. So please enjoy tonight. I hope you bring lots of questions to ask Vincent. He has so many interesting stories and can share some of his ideas about political writing, etc. And of course, the fantastic book that he produced recently. So terima kasih, everybody, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Janet. Okay, so let's start the session, and I offer to you, Mbak Kaca, silakan dimulai.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Mbak Erma, and thank you as well to Bu Janet for the wonderful keynote speech. So I hope everyone is having a wonderful evening in Indonesia. And as for my case, it's noon in here in England, and for Vincent is a very early morning in Brazil. So we're in three different time zones. And once again, welcome to the satellite event of Ubud Writers and Readers Festival, in which we will talk about writing political history with Vincent, the author of Jakarta Method. And we also have here with us enthusiastic students from two partner universities and my friends here from Baca Rasa Dengar. Thank you for allowing me to moderate this 1 hour discussion. And before we start the session, I'm going to introduce Vincent. So Vincent is an award-winning journalist and correspondent, originally from California, USA, and graduated from UC Berkeley, as I've read in his Wikipedia. So he covered Southeast Asia for the Washington Post, but he also has served as the Brazil correspondent for the LA Times, also worked for the Financial Times in London, has also written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Economist, and The Guardian, among others. And he speaks 4 languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Indonesian, and German outside of English. And his first book is a nonfiction title, The Jakarta Method, Washington Anti-Communist Crusade and the Mass Murder Program that shaped our world. And it was published in 2020. And I believe you're working on your next book, Vincent. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for that introduction. I gotta talk to whoever wrote the Wikipedia page because my German is not really good enough to count, and it's been a couple years since I spoke in Indonesian. But yeah, I'm in Brazil now. I'm working on a second book. Which will be partially about Indonesia, but a lot of about the work that I did here before I moved to Jakarta. So yeah, I'm very grateful that this first book has led to the opportunity to keep doing this. Yeah, that's why I'm here in Sao Paulo early Friday morning.
That's great to hear. So our discussion today will be divided into like two main parts. I'll start off like the conversation with a few questions on Vincent's, purpose and process in writing political history. And for the remaining of time, we will go through questions from the audiences. So if you're here, just chat. Just type your questions in the chat. Feel free to write your question either in Indonesian or in English. And if you're in YouTube, you can also type in your questions. So as you know, Vincent wrote about a very controversial and a dark corner of history in Indonesia in his books, and he connects it with similar occurrences of coups in Latin America and emphasizes how significant they were to world history, especially about the winning of the World War by the US. So I'm just going to start off by asking Vincent about what do you think a good political history writing is like, and relating this to your former works, what did you intend to achieve originally and how did it eventually turn out?
Yeah, those are all really good questions. When I started, I didn't really know the answer or what I was doing. Because a lot of journalists spend years, and I had spent like a decade or 12 years writing 1,000-word sort of newspaper features or maybe slightly longer magazine pieces. But to write a book, which is properly a story and hopefully something that regular people will pick up, is an entirely different challenge. And I really did want to write something that regular people could pick up and that it would read like a book. I don't have, I think, the skills or the expertise to write a book about 1965, which was going to be like setting the record straight for the small community of academics that really know the story. I really saw it as my job, if anything, if I had any right to be doing this work at all, would be to step back, take really, really big step backs and try to make global connections and human connections that would make the story sort of work as a book. And so taking that approach, trying to put human beings at the center of the story, I think was essential because people like to read about people. People care a lot more when they know who exactly was in the PKI or who was affiliated with the PKI, or what they really stood for on a human level, than if you kind of write up a report with statistics and treat human beings like numbers, which, I fully understand that that's why the way that some people have to work, because they're working in libraries. But as a journalist, I felt I had the opportunity and the responsibility, if I could do so, to really put human beings at the center of this account. And I think that's a pretty basic trick if you want people to get interested in what you're doing. It's a pretty easy thing to do because people care about people. Interesting characters get people involved no matter what you're doing. And I don't really have any skills working with sort of story or character or literary devices, but taking the time to make sure that I had met enough people, got to know them well enough, and really research where their stories fit into this global history, took me probably an extra 2 years of work just to make it work that way. If I had tried to write something that was sort of like, this is what we know the US has done, this is what we know about the historical consequences, it would have taken me much less time. But as a journalist, I made the decision to go and really get to know people and know them well enough, you could sort of interweave the stories into globally significant episodes that make it all sort of matter more. And I think to some extent I was successful. I certainly don't have the skills of someone that has like a real literary flair, but I think that is sort of like the basic trick that I thought was important to try to employ.
Thank you. So I see that a big part of your book as kind of like giving human stories into it. And probably what I'm curious is that how do you balance about, having that human stories with, objectivity and honesty and writing like a historical piece. But of course, this is like, I'm doing my PhD. So a lot of like the thing that I do is just like, academical work. And there's like this high emphasis on just objectivity and sort of having to be responsible about what you write, and people will sort of like go through it to challenge how objective it is. So what do you think about that? Like how do you balance that?
Okay, there's three things that I think were important for walking that very thin line. Patience, editing, and help. So in order to get the kind of stories that can fit into a objective and important history, you have to get a lot of accounts. So you have to spend a lot of the time really patiently waiting to see who wants to talk to you, who can do so without causing pain to themselves, who's telling the truth, who actually wants to tell the truth. And you end up, when you work this way, you end up doing a lot of interviews that you're not going to use at all. Because a lot of people's stories, although they're incredibly helpful for the formation of your overall understanding of the event, aren't going to fit into something which is book-sized and needs to only focus on the things that are incredibly salient for a regular reader. So I spent a lot of time getting to know people, hearing them out, and then deciding to move on to more people. And then part two, as I said, is editing. Is when you get back to the book, you have to sort of be very, very judicious. Like, okay, who's really going in and who can fit into this in a way which does not give the reader the wrong impression about the overall meaning of what happened, or the let's say, in the objective role that these events played in world history. Mm-hmm. Because if you just, pick somebody and you really like this character and you just make their story the central story, that might sort of, without lying, push the reader in one direction as to what the significance of this thing was. So you have to be very judicious in what you use. And although I think the characters are at the center of the story, there's like not a lot of, it's like 2% of the interviews that I did are in the book. Maybe less, maybe like 1% of the interviews I did are in the book. And then part three, when you're writing a book that is this intentionally ambitious and intentionally almost naive in its scope, you have to be very humble and just be like, before you even write anything, go to every single expert that's ever worked on this and be like, can you help me? Can you tell me if I've got anything wrong? Do you want to read this in advance? So I worked with some, I sent the book to 4 experts that have worked on this book in different parts of the world. I think 2, one Indonesian, one American that studies Indonesia, one Latin American, and someone else that studies Latin America. 4 people. Had them read it and tell me, is there anything that gives the reader the wrong impression here? Not like an error, but like, am I pointing them in the wrong direction? And then I had some people that I worked with too, some people that did a small amount of work on the book, and just had them go through the whole thing and be like, we need to make this bulletproof because this is a controversial book. People are going to come at it if they can. I want you to go through this and find anywhere where we're open to criticism, where we've made mistakes or we've been irresponsible. And yeah, I relied on lots of other people to help me out on that last of the 3 methods.
Okay. So you mentioned that about that, how you're writing a very controversial and sensitive topics when you were about to assign yourself to writing this topic, what were the risks that you foresee, and then what actual challenges and obstacle that you faced when you were doing this investigation of a very sensitive topic?
I think kind of in a classic journalist way, I took the project on without thinking about the risks or the difficulties at all, and then I was like, I'll see what they are. I'll see what they are when I get to them. But no, the biggest thing was the community of victims, right? I mean, there are a lot of people in Indonesia that directly or indirectly suffered as a result of the 1965 and 1966 violence. I think tens of millions, and then millions that were directly affected by it. But a lot of people don't want to speak about this, especially to an American. And you really have to make sure that you explain the project, again, patiently, until people start to understand who you are, start to understand that what the project is, and start to decide that they want to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. And at the very beginning, I thought of bringing an interpreter. And then I did one interview with an interpreter, because this was early in my time in Indonesia. I mean, I knew I was learning Indonesian, but I was like, I might as well bring somebody. And I realized right away, no, this is a bad idea. Because if I'm sitting one-on-one with a person that was either a member of the PKI, or was accused of being a member, or was maybe in one of the affiliated organizations, they don't know who this interpreter is. They're not going to want all the interviews in Indonesian one-on-one, because if there was somebody else in the room, it was going to change the dynamic, especially for something that can be so dramatic to talk about. They didn't want to feel judged by somebody that might misunderstand, or that they might be afraid might misunderstand. These are such sensitive issues. And then finally, I thought, I don't know, is the military going to ban me from Indonesia? Am I going to be able to go back? Am I in trouble? I haven't tried. Who knows what's going to happen? The Indonesian version of the book should be coming out hopefully soon. They've been working on it for a little while. And who knows how careful we'll have to be. Can we really have a launch event in Indonesia? Maybe not. We'll have to really be very careful. What kind of a physical presence can this book have in contemporary Indonesia, or is it just going to have to maybe kind of come out quietly online? So yeah, some of the challenges may still be ahead. Who knows?
Okay. Well, but I'm also curious, since you're also not only writing about Indonesia, but also other countries in Latin Americas, were the risks and the challenges the same as in those regions, or is that or maybe in Indonesia is just a lot more sensitive and risky in comparison of those other regions?
Yeah. So the short answer is no, and it's a good question because it relates to a dynamic which I tried to illuminate at the end of the book, which is that most countries down here in South America, went through a national truth and reconciliation process in which the victims of US-backed anti-communist violence, the victims of dictatorships that killed or tortured people that were left-wing or accused of being left-wing, were declared publicly in a process of sort of national trauma healing. They were declared to be guilty of crimes against humanity, right? And the people that were the victims of this were declared to be unjustly victimized by these dictatorships. So in many countries in Latin America, I mean, this shocked a lot of the people that I interviewed for the book. I would tell them, well, in Brazil, the president used to be a left-wing guerrilla. She went to jail. She was tortured by the dictatorship, and then she became the president. This is actually quite common dynamic in South America, that victims of the dictatorship are so fully declared to be innocent of and undeserving of what they went through that they either re-enter society normally or as kind of heroes of the resistance, right? So you get a lot of politicians in Latin America that were victimized by this, and they went through this process of truth and reconciliation, came out on the other side in the country, and it varies. Brazil has a problem of sliding back into a situation where the dictatorship has some defenders, but that of course did not happen in Indonesia. Many people hoped that Jokowi might start something like that. We all know that his relationship with the military as president has been very different than that, and that's why the answer is no. It was a lot easier here. There's all kinds of institutes dedicated to this stuff, whereas in Indonesia, it might be illegal technically to even be telling the truth.
So what do you think we can learn from the experience of the Latin American countries regarding these issues?
Yeah, I mean, you can never fix the past, right? It never goes away, but you can decide collectively as a nation, as a democracy, to look at it honestly and decide how you want to move on from it. And countries that did that, I think, are happy that they did. Argentina and Chile are really classic examples of this kind of process. Brazil did a worse. But a lot of the victims that I spoke to said the same thing. Like, look, we know we're not going to get any money. We know we're not going to get revenge. We don't want revenge. We just want everybody to come together as a country and talk as Indonesia about what this meant and come to an honest conclusion about how we're supposed to incorporate this into our past. And I think there's a lot to learn from countries like Argentina and Chile.
But do you think the main difference is or the key to having that reconciliation is on the political figure
Yeah, there has to be political will. I mean, you can't. I mean, unless you have a literal revolution from below, you need to have elites sign up to this. You need to have either pressure on political elites so that they want to do this, or in the historical interpretation of the country and what it will mean. So yeah, you need the political class basically involved, especially because there's the question of declassified files, right? I mean, I believe that probably the Indonesian military has things hidden that we don't know. They may not still have them, but certainly they think they used to. I think that the U.S. government still has things that we don't know. The UK government, I believe, they might be hanging out in the archives. But yeah, you need to get the governments pressured into doing something.
Okay. Another interesting thing that you've talked about is being a U.S. citizen, sort of investigating the issues. And I think I was deep into stalking you in Twitter, and that was a criticism about how when you got the book deal, that it was actually a lot more difficult for an Indonesian scholar or journalist to actually be supported to write about this. But looking into that, what do you think was the advantages of actually being a U.S. citizen writing about this in comparison to if an Indonesian would write about these issues, or maybe in some cases, an Indonesian actually writing about this issue would have different outcomes that you can't cover. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So I think I always try to stress that the Jakarta method is a book that is about the formation of a neo-colonial global order. But it is also a book that is published into a neo-colonial global order. And part of that neo-colonial global order means that U.S. citizens, people from the global north, have all kinds of privileges and access and resources that people in the global south do not. That is an unjust reality. And it is an unjust reality that is, I think, to some extent, a consequence of the dynamics that are discussed in the book. But it is our reality. And it is very far from ideal that somebody that has written for the US press, that has a US passport, that has connections with other media figures, is going to get more money, not that I'm going to throw in the bank account, but, and spend on whatever I want, but more money to do the research than somebody would get if they were from Indonesia or Zimbabwe or Paraguay, and is going to have more access to the media to get the story out afterwards. So those are the two things that are true in any kind of north-south divide. I think that is an unjust but real situation in the global order. So I think the best thing that you can do as an American, if you're going to be working as a journalist, is to take your responsibilities very, very seriously. Make sure that you are not that you are in constant contact with the people that we most affected by the work, that you understand the extreme degree of privilege that you have, discursive privilege almost, as someone that works in the US media rather than somebody that might be, you know, doing a PhD in East Java. And then there's the very specific question when it comes to Indonesia, because as somebody that does not need to live in Indonesia for the rest of my life, I don't have to deal with the possible dynamic that many Indonesians might, which is they could be tagged later as communist or communist sympathizing, or have to deal with implications for their family. I mean, I don't know if I'll go into it, but I mean, indirectly in my family, we have some connections to Indonesia, and that part of the family was like, we don't know if, you know, this is good for us. And, you know, that's me being white and American. So one thing that I do not have to put up with, and this is very specific to the Indonesia dynamic rather than just the entire discursive power that people born in the United States are unjustly rewarded with just for being born in the United States, is that I didn't have to deal with the possibility of like consequences for my professional life or for my family, or all kinds of things that could come up in the rest of, you know, your life if you're living in Indonesia. Who knows, you know, what stance the government may take down the road on people who do this kind of work. I mean, or how, if there might be immediate consequences. So this work was the result of hopefully some hard work, but probably mostly my discursive privilege as somebody from the global north. Like, sort of almost the main thing I did with this is use the resources that allowed me to have to go all over the world, talk to as many people as possible, and then use the connections that granted me to really get people to hear about, like, to get this thing somehow in the media, in places where people don't usually hear about this story. So yeah, that dynamic is essential within the book and outside the book.
Okay, great. Okay, now before I go into the next question, I'm just gonna check if there is someone typing any questions. Is there anyone asking through YouTube? Because I can't check directly into YouTube. Otherwise, we can just continue with the conversation then. Okay. Irma, is there anyone asking questions through YouTube? I just don't want to miss out if anyone has given any questions. Okay, otherwise we'll just continue, because and it's also actually a question that a friend from Wawancara Dengar told me. I'm not sure if he's here, maybe he's here, but he's actually curious about you as a US citizen, like discovering about the role of US in the many parts of this history in Indonesia and Latin America. Like, how does that change your attitude, or sort of or how do you see yourself as a US citizen after going through all this and revealing all this facts related to your country?
So before I started work on this book, I didn't consider myself a naive person. I figured that as things go, I had a pretty decent idea of the exercise of US power in the 20th century. I felt like I wasn't like ignorant about this stuff. I felt like, you know, I've lived in a bunch of countries. I've met a lot of people. Hopefully I kind of know history a little bit. However, going through this particular material for 2 or 3 years obliterated my identity. And I'm still maybe in the process of reconstructing it. It was quite difficult on 2 different levels. Just the very basic level, dealing with some very, very, very hard stories and getting to know people that are still grappling with them all the time. And then trying to reconstruct, replace myself in the global symbolic order. Like, who am I? What is an American in relation to the rest of the world? What does it mean? Because although when I started before this book, I thought that I was relatively well informed. When you're a kid in America, what you're taught is insane. Like, you are growing up in the United States, you are really led to believe that you're from the best country. Your country has a uniquely important and uniquely positive place in the world. And even though in my university in my 20s and 30s, I learned a bunch of things that undermine that view quite a bit, it's still kind of in the background, right? Spending some time with this real material, that's so clearly and forcefully. Obviously that narrative is nonsense. It's not only wrong, it's precisely backwards. We have a unique role in the world, but it is about the exercise of power and the creation of privilege. And often the creation of privileges for like the stupidest kind of lives you can imagine. Like all of these things that are done in the name of the United States are done so that like people can like drive around paved suburbs and like eat too much food and like watch TV. So although that part of my identity was not fully intact, this work, as I said, blew it to pieces. And I think I'm still reconstructing a new identity in its place. And I think maybe the second book will have something to do with working through that process of like, well, what are you supposed to do then if this is what your country's history is? Yeah, that process was, I often feel guilty even talking about this because the dozens, hundreds of people I met went through things that are unimaginably worse than this little mini crisis that I'm describing. But the working on the book was psychologically very, very difficult. It changed me, I think. And I'm still not really, I haven't really come out the other side yet, I think.
Okay, so I think it's also because of we have a lot of university students in here. A lot of them, I think, is doing English study, and maybe they have aspirations, to become also like journalists and authors. Like, I'm just like curious, like, what would you tell your younger self at that time when you were in the university? So what do you think that all those university students should learn, should prepare based on your self-growth over the years as a journalist and as an author?
Okay, the short answer is read history. The long answer is I didn't go to journalism school. I didn't think I wanted to be a journalist when I was an undergrad. I thought I was going to do a PhD and do sort of political theory, academic writing, or
Did you regret that though? Because that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. I got into a PhD program in political philosophy, and then I didn't start it because I kind of fell into journalism in Venezuela. But looking back on the first decade of my career as a journalist, and without naming names or being too rude, looking at the work that a lot of my colleagues do in the English-speaking global journalism industry, too many people know too much about what happened this week and not enough about what happened 10, 50, 100 years ago. I mean, like, whatever topic you're working on, you will gain so much from reading one or two books about the history of that place or that thing. Journalists should read more history. They don't need to be historians, but like, if you're going, anywhere I go ever, I just got back for the second book. I went to Turkey and then Bahrain and then came back here. So on the plane to Bahrain, I'm gonna read two books about the history of Bahrain in the last 100 years. And I don't just read about the thing that I'm going to be investigating. I always start 50 or 100 years before, and that is incredibly invaluable. And it's not that hard, and it's quite fun too. So yeah, I wish that some more people would try to base their understanding of the present in a firmer historical grounding.
Okay, wow, that's a very great suggestions, especially for anyone who is doing an academic study, including me. Okay, let's see if anyone wants to ask any more questions. But if not, I think we've had such a rich and fruitful conversation over the past 50 minutes. I learned a lot from you, and also getting a lot of insight. So thank you very much, Vincent. And I hope you have a great time in Sao Paulo, and good luck for your new books. We're very looking forward to it.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna give the floor back to Mbak Irma. Are you there, Mbak Irma? Hello.
That's all right. Let me just say thank you though to everyone for that sent a question, and to you for the conversation. Yeah, thanks for having me, and for anybody that sent in a question.
Oh yeah, and if anyone wants to get in touch or wants to continue conversation, how can they reach you?
I guess I'm on Twitter, my name, and then my website is just myname.com, and there's an email on there. I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. Usually try to respond to everyone usually. Yeah, I'm not hard to find. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Vincent. And thank you so much to everyone who has prepared today's satellite events. And hopefully see you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Mbak Amira is not joining us anymore, ya? Okay, I guess this is it. Thank you everyone for joining the satellite event this evening. Sesi ini terselenggara berkat kerjasama WRF dengan Kedutaan Besar Amerika di Jakarta. Silahkan dapatkan informasi lebih lanjut mengenai festival di Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, atau YouTube @ubudwritersfestival. Terima kasih semua dan sampai jumpa di WRF tahun depan.